The reading this morning is from Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through 13. Jacob's dream at Bethel. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He reached a certain place and spent the night there. When the sun had set, he took one of the stones at that place and put it near his head. Then he lay down there. He dreamed and saw a raised staircase, its foundation on earth and its top touching the sky. And God's messengers were ascending and descending on it. Suddenly, the Lord was standing on it and saying, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will become like the dust of the earth. You will spread out to the west, east, north, and south. Every family of earth will be blessed because of you and your descendants. I am with you now. I will protect you everywhere you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done everything I have promised you. When Jacob woke from his sleep, he thought to himself, the Lord is definitely in this place, but I didn't know it. He was terrified and thought, this sacred place is awesome. It's none other than God's house and the entrance to heaven. After Jacob got up early in the morning, he took the stone that he had put near his head, placed it up on a sacred pillar, and poured oil on top of it. He named that sacred place Bethel, though Luz was the city's original name.
So, there was a song that was to the same tune as Jacob's Ladder that came out in the 70s. The words were written in the 70s. And just thought it'd be good to hold this. We have the ladder image vertical, but this song was We Are Dancing Sarah's Circle. Have you heard that? We are dancing Sarah's circle. We are dancing Sarah's circle. We are dancing Sarah's circle, sister, brothers, sisters and brothers all. On and on the circle's moving, on and on the circle's moving, on and on the circle's moving, sisters, brothers all. So just to add the idea of the ladder, and we're going to talk a lot about that this morning, but there's also circles, right? There's also the sense of connecting like that is going on. And probably not an accident that this was written in the 70s when we were becoming aware of women's liberation and how women had been marginalized. So I think it's good to be aware. It's good to be kind of brought into this understanding that our faith continues to evolve, right? And to become more inclusive. And to speak to who we are today. So this is the first recorded dream in the Bible. Isn't that cool? Jacob's dream comes after he stole his brother's birthright and his blessing and was on the run because his brother had it in for him, his brother Esau. Jacob was alone. He was worried, didn't have any protection. He realized his own sin and probably expected that he would be punished for that. He felt utterly alone and vulnerable, lacked the mature faith of his father and his grandfather. His father was Isaac, his grandfather was Abraham. So in some ways, the story of Jacob is the story of what it takes to grow up, become who he really was. Jacob's desire to be blessed and to be the one who got the blessing became for him the goal in and of itself. Same can happen to us, where we have a desire to live a godly life, but it all ends up with our striving to be holy, not in the sense of really living in the image of God, but in order to do it right, to be the ones that get blessed because we've done the right things, we've lived the good life, we've done what we think is needed or what was the right thing. And that we should be blessed because we're righteous. So the outer appearance may look that way, but sometimes what's going on inside doesn't match. We experience one failure after another. Is God just trying to push us in the right direction, but we get stubborn and insist on having it our own way. So the story of Jacob is one of stubbornness, wanting to do it his way, wanting to be blessed, wanting God to somehow watch out for him, and thinking he has to earn that blessing. Sometimes it can be that God in his grace reveals God's self directly. That's what's happening with Jacob. God revealed himself in all of his glory with this ladder reaching, in dream, the ladder reaching all the way to heaven, all the way down to earth. Angels descending and ascending on the ladder. The Lord introduces himself to Jacob as the God of Abraham and Isaac and his God. The ancestral blessing is amended to include him. So in this season of life, probably Jacob wouldn't have been able to meet God in any other way. When we're really focused on our own need and our own worries and our own feelings of being overwhelmed or of doing the wrong things, God had to cut through all that. I mean, if God had come in any other way other than a dream, if God had showed up in someone who was more, who was there, someone who was accessible and close, Jacob may have either ignored him, or scoffed at him, or tried to bargain with him, tried to bargain with God. God had to overwhelm him, had to fire his imagination so that Jacob submitted to him in awe and fear. Had to come that way. God uses whatever means to get through to us. And with Jacob, it wasn't going to be, just an encounter. It was going to have to be something like this, where he was sort of overwhelmed with this dream in a good way. So his inner conflict, his outer conflict is resolved and unexpectedly. Instead of pronouncing a curse on the one who thoroughly deserved it, God pronounces a blessing and gives a promise of protection. Isn't that just like God? When we thought we were heading in one direction, or we had to try to pull every string we could to get, to somehow make it, God comes along and says, I'm blessing you. I'm protecting you. I'm watching out for you. This is a story of God's presence and protection. Revelation contains the promise for all of us. Not just God protecting Jacob, but God protecting us. God's presence is going to be with us. This is the promise for us. And the image is of a ladder. We talked about the image of a comfort bird. I think the comfort bird is like a ladder. It's a way of connecting with God, with God's intentions, with what it is that, it's a physical sign of a spiritual presence. So what is the ladder? Some might say that it's the revelation of the God of power and might, who deliberately chooses to look down and take care of us. Took care of Jacob. If he's going to take care of Jacob, he's going to take care of us too. A reminder that we're not going to be alone. That we too are wanted. We too are chosen for purposes. We're chosen to live a life that is pleasing to God, but that is unique and blessed in certain ways. From another perspective, the ladder is the means. Some would say this is the means of transporting up and down, kind of mystically, a mystical bridge, a mystical transport. Angels descending and ascending. Just like the angels are going up and down, we are being carried up to God, and God's angels are coming to us. Another interpretation is the ladder is a prophetic prototype of Jesus. The ladder is Jesus coming down to us, his word, the word becoming flesh, and also us ascending to be with him, with Jesus' ascent, at the resurrection and the ascension, that the ladder is representing both of those things, God coming to us and us going to be with God. And Jesus is the link for that. He's the ladder for that. He is the ladder, right? So we can also imagine figurative ladders continually lowered into our lives, bridges, connections, stairways to heaven, should we say. Where have you experienced them? A way to a greater understanding, a greater assurance, a greater promise. Maybe it was a teacher, a mentor, a spiritual guide, a compassionate friend. These may be ladders who connect us with a larger reality and a deeper truth of who we are and who in God we are becoming despite the difficulties in front of us, despite how hard it looks, despite all the tensions that we feel. Jacob still had all of those. This is one of the things about that struck me about this as I was going over it this week, is that even though Jacob had this vision of being connected with God and God's assurance that he's blessed and that his family will inhabit the earth, that Jacob still had to go through the struggles with Esau. He still had to work with Laban. He still had to have the ins and outs with his wives. He had more than one wife, right? Leah and Rachel. That it doesn't necessarily, even just because we're blessed doesn't mean it's all going to be easy for us and everything's just going to be laid out, on a red carpet. We're still going to need to live into that reality. There's a dream. We're supposed to hold on to the dream as we're living into the realities that are in front of us. Like Jake, I'm wondering with you all if we could have a conversation, which we can't, unfortunately, but have you had some sense when in your younger days, or maybe even more recently, of God's blessing? Has there been a sense, some moment when you felt like, you know what, I sense God's blessing me? We got those moments in the gospel with Jesus himself when he was baptized and there was a word, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." And at the transfiguration, when Jesus was connected with Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets, some sense of who he was. When Peter confessed that he was the Messiah, surely you are the Christ. You are my Messiah. Dream moments, in a sense. These are dreaming moments, pointing to future realities. We may have a moment in a dream, in an experience, in a word from a trusted source. The promise of our life becomes clear when we somehow hear it. All the noise. I think that's another reason why God spoke to Jacob in a dream, is because that way there was no other noise, including the voices in his head. Somehow that word gets through to us, and I hope you've had that. And if you haven't, I pray that you will. Some sense of, I am with you despite all the stuff that's going on, despite all the worries and the pandemics and the physical ailments or whatever it is that you're facing. I am, you are mine and I am yours. And it's a foreshadowing, right? These experiences. This was a foreshadowing of Jacob of where he was heading. It's a foreshadowing of, but it's speaking the truth of our identity. It's like a word spoken over our lives. This was a word spoken over Jacob's life. He still had to live into it, right? He still had to embrace it. He had to accept it. We need to embrace and accept the word spoken over our lives. Think about who might have spoken a word over your life. How did God's blessing come through to you? When was that? Have you forgotten it? This is a time to remember it, folks. This is a time to remember. This is a time to recall what it was and who that was. Maybe it was a grandmother. Maybe it was a teacher, a coach, a mentor, a close friend, a spouse, a sibling. Maybe it came through in a dream, like it did with Jacob. You know, he was in such a low point at that point. He was close to despair. Without the faith that there is more going on, that there is a bigger pattern at work here, that there is more than the moment, right? We're living in more than just this moment. We are living this moment, but there is more to life than this exact moment. You know, without that, we're gonna really struggle. It's going to be hard not to fall into despair. You know, Jacob needed a promise. He needed an assurance. He needed a hopeful direction, a future outcome revealed, or it would be tempting to give up. The dream had not yet come to fruition, but it will. This is what it was about. No, you're not experiencing it yet, but this is what is in store for you, Jacob. It's what's in store for us too. We realize that God is holding us even when we cannot hold ourselves. So I had a moment, and I have. It's taken me a while to even talk about it. I don't think I've ever talked about it in a sermon before, really. But it really comes through now for me. My father, when I was a baby, right? I was the oldest of 4 children. My father was a veteran of the Second World War, fought in Germany, he was in the army, he was a timber wolf, and they were the liberators of Middelburg and Nordhausen, which were concentration camps. So my father had all of that experience. All of that is behind me coming into the world, not too many years after that. And my father, in what he said to me and what my mother has reminded me of occasionally, that he dedicated me to God. You know, he gave me to God. My father did. You know, it has taken me a long time to know what to do with that. I mean, to know what that really, to not just sort of bypass it or sort of not take it very seriously, or feel like maybe I'm expected to be something that I'm not. You know, in other words, to really take in the meaning of my father giving me to God. You know, that was the word spoken over me when I was a baby, you know, before I was aware of anything. That's another thing. I've been told about it, but I didn't experience it, you know, in a sense myself. I've had to accept it. I've had to kind of reflect on it and pray into it as to what that really means. More than likely, people you all know me in ways that, you know, people around us know us better than we know ourselves. So you might have thought, well, of course he gave him to God. Yeah. So what is it about that? Well, how else would he be where he is without that happening? Well, how much is me and how much was God, my father giving me to God like that? Who is it that's spoken something or done something for you, right? That has connected you with God? Who has been the ladder, right, for you? My father was a ladder at that point. Who has been a ladder for you? What I'm encouraging you to do is to remember that. You know, let that be an anchor. It's holding you to earth, but also to heaven. Not just one or the other. This didn't take Jacob out of it into you know, another place where he didn't have to deal with the issues and with the consequences of his behaviors. He still did. But it was different, right? It's different when we know that we're connected, that there's that we're on that ladder. Sometimes we're going up, sometimes we're coming down, sometimes we're dancing the circle with Sarah, sometimes we're aware of it, and sometimes we're not, but it's there, friends. The ladder was always there for Jacob. From that day on, he knew who he was and where he was. So what is God's response to our misdeeds and mistakes? I will be with you. That's God's response to all of Jacob's stuff. What does God say when we're at our worst? He says, you are my child and I love you. What does God want us to know about our future, which is yet unknown? That we are in God's hands, that we have a future and a hope, that there is a ladder linking us with God, not just in a momentary dream, not just back then, back there, not just with that person, whoever they were, that somehow saw something in us or said something over us. Like Simeon said over Jesus, this child is destined for the rise and fall of many. And he is the one that we've been waiting for. That was Simeon's. In many ways, we're the ones that are needed today. God has put us here for a purpose too. God is blessing each one of you, friends. We're meant to keep and remember that what God breathes in our dreams, what is foreshadowed, what is kind of hinted at in our younger days, to allow them to frame and orient the rest of our lives. Allow those latter experiences into you, accept them, and let them motivate you and guide you and remind you, especially in your down times, that you are not alone. No matter what it is, you are not alone. God is with you. Amen.